So now, without further delay, let's begin today's event, sponsored by LexisNexis and ITE and hosted by Payment Source. It's my pleasure to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Lenny Liebman. Lenny, take it away.
Thanks so much, and again, I want to welcome everybody. I think you're really in the right place at the right time. This is a great topic. We've got really rich content from both ITE Group and from LexisNexis about what's obviously you'll learn is a great market opportunity, but also a real challenge, which is why we subtitled this sort of Scoring the Unscorable. I want to let you know who you're going to be hearing from today. First up is going to be David O'Connell, who's a senior analyst with ITE Group's wholesale banking team. David has some tremendous research he's going to share with us. He's going to do his best he can, I think, to get through it in about 25, 30 minutes or so. Invite you to play close attention, and also, again, as we said, these slides are all going to be available to you, so you'll be able to eyeball his research firsthand. And then after David, we're going to hear from Ben Cutler, who's the Senior Director of Market Planning with LexisNexis Risk Solutions and leads its risk assessment on small business initiatives. So again, a lot of hands-on experience with this market segment that's going to be really helpful for you and your organizations as you try to take advantage of what's not only a lucrative opportunity, but I think is also really important because we have to get capital, obviously, to these small businesses in order that they can perform the function that they're supposed to in our macro economy. So again, looking forward to hearing from both of them. I want to encourage you again, submit questions at any time. Don't wait until the Q&A session. We'd like to get your questions in the queue right away so you have the opportunity to get some free consulting here from Ben and David. And again, a lot of great material. I do not want to take any more time because David's got a lot to share. So David, I'm going to invite you to get started.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And Lenny, I completely agree with you. I'm really excited that so many people are in the room. I'm excited to be talking on this topic. It truly is important, okay? The market for loans to small businesses is more than $500 billion in size. It is the lifeblood of capital to small businesses, and small businesses are among the biggest employers or source of employment in America. So we really are talking about something rather important today. As I talk to you for the next 25 to 30 minutes, I will be speaking from a data set that I was fortunate enough to be able to field last summer. I'm going to talk just a little bit about where the data comes from. I won't get into too much, housekeeping or survey logistics, but I do want you to understand where the data comes from. I've got some interesting information about the market sizing and shares, and a bit of a kind of a profile of both the SMB lending market and the participants within it. I have information about how and why they borrow, when they borrow, how they decide where to apply, how they decide where to close, how they feel about the customer experience, and also just a little bit of market sub-segmentation of small businesses according to size and how they differ. Okay. So first of all, I will be speaking to a bit of data for the next 15 or 20 minutes. I want you to have a feel for what a great data set it is, okay? Back in July of 2016, I surveyed, I and my firm wanted to learn a lot more about the credit market. We wanted to get kind of a de facto CAT scan, if you will, of the typical credit-seeking SMB. So we surveyed 501 SMBs that sought credit in the last 2 years, okay? We covered a handful of different credit providers. We basically wanted to find out the who, what, when, why, and how of lending, of borrowing by SMBs. When do they borrow relative to the need? How do they borrow? What are the terms under which they borrow? And what do they do with the funds? And also how they feel about the application and close processes. So lots of times what folks first want to know about any market is the market size. And here we have the market as I see it. I see it as over $500 billion in size right this now. I do think it will grow because of a handful of factors, primarily the low interest rate environment, which is propelling lots of small businesses to borrow. I do have the proverbial line in the chart going downward as we look to the right on that chart. And the reason for that is this. As we all know, we are in a very anomalous interest rate environment. Okay, interest rates have been anomalously low for a seemingly unsustainable period of time. And even though one might cynically say that the unsustainable always gets maintained, it can't go on forever. So I have gone out on a limb and projected an increase in interest rates on this horizon that causes some SMBs to get into some credit trouble, and as a result, some banks retracting from the market just a little bit. Okay, and that's why I have the market getting just a bit smaller as you go out towards 2018. How I sized this market was based on a combination of public information, information that's already out in the public domain, and data points that I was able to get as a result of the survey that I fielded last summer. The number of SMBs in America, the percent that are actually businesses. We kind of pulled this screening trick when we fielded the survey to make sure that we included in the survey businesses that were actually businesses rather than hobbies. The other metrics were the propensity of these businesses to apply for credit, approval rates, and average facility sizes. And that is how all of those factors are how I got at this market sizing and projection. Okay, so that's how big the market is. Now I want to get into, I had very aggressive ambitions about this survey, and I feel fortunate that I was kind of able to achieve sort of my goal of getting a de facto CAT scan, so to speak, of the typical credit-seeking SMB. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, okay, take away this. I'm in Boston, and I'm actually kind of looking out a window at this real beautiful 100-year-old brick building. And here in Boston, back in the last century, we had this notoriously corrupt mayor named James Michael Curley, and one of his campaign slogans was "Vote early, vote often, vote Curley." Kind of scary, but also kind of funny. And you can think of that as a quip that kind of characterizes the SMB credit market. SMBs borrow early. They apply often. I think they are relatively opportunistic in the fact that they do a lot of comparison shopping. However, they are still somewhat bank loyal. Okay. Now, first of all, how are these SMBs borrowing? It turns out that if one segments the market by loan type, it's a very fragmented market, with the only exception being that SBA loans have about 17% of the market. The remainder, as you can see, again, it's pretty fragmented, all the way from equipment loans to various forms of operating current and long-term lines of credit, and the presence or absence of security. Okay, so again, pretty fragmented, with the exception of SBA loans having a 17% share of the market. The funding need compelling SMBs to seek credit was also a data point that we were able to get at. If you look at this chart, it seems a little busy, but I can help kind of unpack it. A quick way to read it is that on the left-hand side of the chart, you've got the highest bars there. That means that most SMBs, when they seek credit, they do so because they need to finance working capital, and to a slightly lesser degree, also fixed assets. All right. Interesting also on this chart are the two sets of bars on the right-hand end of the chart. Making payroll. About 11% of credit-seeking SMBs borrow for this reason. That is a little concerning to me, because as far as I'm concerned, if a SMB is seeking to borrow money in order to make payroll, they are to some degree living hand to mouth, okay? And they may have liquidity problems, in which case you will very much want to have your underwriting pencil sharpened. You'll want to have as much, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. You want to have as much data as possible on not just the SMB, but the individuals who are the principals at the SMBs to which you're considering a loan. Also really important on this chart is the next set of bars in. Losses incurred while in startup stage. I believe that most of the folks in this room are from either alternative lenders or traditional lending institutions such as banks. Traditional lending institutions are providers of debt, okay? They are not providers of equity, all right? I'm a little concerned that somewhere between 12 and 17% of credit-seeking SMBs are seeking debt for a funding use that is basically equity in nature. So again, for these folks that are seeking to borrow money to finance losses incurred as a startup, you want to be on the lookout for these folks, because most of the folks in this room, when you think about the role you play in the credit market, you're providing debt. You're not providing equity. Okay? So here's the early part, all right? 5 bars here. Easy way to unpack this chart is to look at the 2 bars on the left-hand end of the chart. And what it basically tells us is that 71% of small businesses, when they seek credit, okay, they do so weeks or months in advance of the actual financing need. In a couple of minutes, I'll show you some turnaround times for the application and the close. And it turns out that this is actually plenty of time, okay, for SMBs to complete their debt acquisition experience. So it's early in general terms. It's also early relative to the turnaround times that most of you folks have. Also interesting on this chart is that 4% on the right-hand side of the chart. 4% of credit-seeking SMBs do so without a specific financing need in hand. That's kind of interesting. They're doing it just in case they might need it in the future. The 11% who borrow at the time of the financing need, again, I'm going to use the phrase sharpen your pencils. You'll want to have your underwriting pencils sharpened because if folks are borrowing at the time of the financing need, it's possible that they're borrowing under duress, and if under duress, they might not fit your risk profile as a borrower. Here is the often part. This is the most interesting and surprising slice of the data set that we fielded last summer. And it basically is telling us that credit-seeking SMBs submit a surprisingly high number of applications over a 2-year period. We asked them to tell us how many times they applied for credit over the last 2 years, and only 35% said that they had applied, made 2 loan applications or less. Okay, just under 45% applied between 3 and 6 times, and everybody else applied even more times than that. Okay, again, a very interesting finding. And if you're interested in the accuracy of this, when we saw this portion of the data set, we actually went through all of the data, okay, row by row, meaning respondent by respondent, and response by response, okay? And what we discovered is that every single person who gave us the answers on this pie chart were revealed to be, valid respondents based on the way they behaved throughout the survey. And now for some market share information. I like the market share information because I was able to get it in 2 ways. This first chart tells us the market share by credit application. And well, let me back up a step, okay? This pie chart is a good opportunity for me to let you know what kinds of credit providers were covered in the survey. First of all, banks were covered in the survey. Primary deposit institution, that means what it obviously means. If a lady or gentleman with a chain of bowling alleys applied for credit where they also deposit, that institution was categorized as primary deposit bank. If they also applied at a bank that's a rival to their deposit bank, that rival bank showed up as other deposit institution. So we covered banks in 2 ways. Everybody's curious about, the retention factor. That's why we did that. The survey also covered credit unions, alternative lenders, and finance companies. And when we sliced the application data to get market shares, we found that, and I'm sorry to stand here because I want to make sure that I quote my market shares correctly. And it's gone, of course, because now I'm presenting. How does this happen? So what we found was that 54% of applications were submitted to banks, both primary, in the form of primary and other deposit institutions. The rest of the market by application was split, somewhat evenly between alternative lenders, finance companies, and credit unions, with the alts and the finance companies having a bit more of a share there. Now, what's interesting is when we then re-examine the market by closed loan, okay? What we discover here is that when it comes to closing loans, not just applying for loans, SMBs turned out to be a little bit more bank loyal, because what we see here is that banks, okay, have 65% of the market, a higher market share, obviously, than all the others, and a higher market share than by application. And again, the remainder of the market held by mostly alternative lenders and finance companies, and to a lesser degree credit unions with about 6% of the market. On this next slide, which I'm not seeing, and that's really unhelpful. Okay.
Yep, you've got factors impacting destination of application.
Okay, so good. Now it's finally up on my screen. So we were curious, okay, how do SMBs decide where to apply? And we ran kind of a large number of potential factors by them. And here's how it shook out, okay? The most important determinants are at the top of the chart. The less important ones are at the bottom of the chart. Most important to credit-seeking SMBs when they decided where to apply were price and term, okay? They are among the top three, okay? Also among the top three was confidence in the security of the information that they provide online. This is kind of an interesting factor, okay? It's a little hard to control the price of your interest because everybody has a relatively fixed weighted average cost of capital. The security issue is also kind of interesting because it favors larger institutions that are better able to bring into their ecosystem really heavy-duty cybersecurity and authentication capabilities. After price and term came in importance two very interesting factors. First of all, process and relationship, okay? By process, I mean folks wanted the processes to be simple, fast, and non-repetitive, okay? And by relationship, I mean they wanted to either have a personal relationship with the institution or someone at the institution, or to have had a prior business relationship with someone at that institution or the institution itself. What is interesting to me, okay, about process and relationship is they are very interdependent as far as I'm concerned. When you field an army of business banking officers to go out and field loans, okay, they may be terrific at establishing those human relationships that cause businesses to apply at your bank. But they will only be as good as the speed of the processes that back them up, you know, at the branch and out of the headquarters. And they will only be as good as the data they have access to do things like give the principals that they're applying SMBs updates, for example, on their loan application. Okay, and let me move the slide forward. And also important to SMBs when they decided where to apply for credit was the breadth of the underwriting process. They wanted to be assured that the evaluation of their credit application would be rather broad in scope and kind of holistic, okay? Not just based on a credit score and narrow data from the Ratings Bureau services. The factors determining where the loan closes were pretty much identical in terms of the insights that it gives us. Price and term were at the top, followed by sort of the interdependent twins, I think, okay, of process and relationship. Again, they want relatively fast and easy processes, and they want to do business with people and institutions that they already know. And in order for those relationships to be there, those folks have to have good processes. Here's a little bit of information, demographic information. And it basically tells us who at the SMB was most in charge of the decision to obtain credit, all right? And it turns out that some mixture of like late boomer, Gen X, are dominating that population. We have 46% of the folks in charge of the credit decision being from the age bracket of 35 to 40, which to me means Generation X. Okay, boomers significantly less at 23%, and millennials also significantly less at 27%. This next slide is about technology, all right? And I think it's kind of an interesting slide. It's actually about sentiment as far as I'm concerned. And what this slide tells us is that folks at SMBs, they do a couple things. First of all, they tend to adopt technology as soon as a product is released or after it's been in the market, okay? They very infrequently buy technology only when prices drop. Okay, this tells me two things. First of all, that when it comes to technology, they are generally embracers of it, and they don't avoid technology in order to reduce costs. It also tells me that that as embracers of technology, they are very likely to embrace digitized processes of dealing with their credit providers. In other words, the finding here is that since they're relatively aggressive embracers of technology, you should reflect that in the channels over which you interact with credit-seeking SMBs. And at this moment, we have a polling question, and I want to have Lenny run that by you.
Sure. Thanks so much. And boy, that was a lot of rich information, and we got a lot of questions already, so I appreciate all these great questions from attendees. Again, if you've got a question, go ahead and get it in early so we can have it part of Q&A. And very simple, binary question we're asking you here on the polling question that you should see on the screen in front of you, just asking you to describe your institution's goals for automating, applying technology to the lending process, especially as it regards SMBs. And we're just sort of giving you two choices to characterize it, but instead of a wide spectrum. Do you think sort of good enough, or are you looking for sort of stellar, competitively differentiating, needle-moving technology as part of your approach to this market? If you could click just the one of those two that you think best characterizes what's going on in your organization, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, in real time, share the results. Make sure you click Submit. And, David, I'm going to ask you to look at these results along with me. Very simple poll, but okay. It might be a little bit of a diagnostic. And we can see that I'm a little bit surprised, I guess, maybe because some feel like to even tap into this market would be enough. Only 40% are looking to really do stellar differentiation. Is this what you were expecting to see?
So I was expecting it to be maybe the reverse, okay?
Yep.
Yeah, this is a very lucrative market. It's a huge market. The customer experience is a huge component of success in the market, and improving the customer experience really relies upon automation. So I'm a little bit surprised that kind of good enough is winning over stellar here.
Well, maybe in the rest of the information you share, you'll get some of the people a little bit more, our attendees, a little bit more excited about the fact that there's really some ROI here. So why don't you go ahead and continue with your prezo?
Actually, it may also speak to another issue, and that is that the scarcity of funding. It could be that if we asked about the sentiment of the actual folks on the line, they might want to be stellar, but they may be aware that the scarcity of funding makes them have to settle for good enough. Okay.
Great point.
So I've raised a couple of issues around underwriting at this point, and here is another really interesting underwriting issue. This is a super busy slide, and I sort of apologize for that, but you'll be able to mull it over when you get a copy of the slide deck. I can help you unpack the slide very quickly, okay? Here we basically asked folks, to what degree do you mix personal and business in your life as a principal at a small or medium-sized business? The fast way to read this slide is to look at that very center outcome. No, there is no mixing of the personal and business at my business. Interesting here is the fact that among smaller businesses, okay, 23% or less, only 23% or less, are saying that there's no mixing, all right? The only folks who are saying that there's no mixing at a higher rate are the folks at bigger businesses, and that's about 46% of businesses with more than $10 million in revenue, okay? Here's why I'm concerned about that. Is if you look at the two rows, okay, the two data points at the bottom, folks are saying I mix my I register my personal assets as business assets, or they mix it in the opposite direction, okay? And I'm sorry that I'm tripping over my words here, but basically folks are mixing registration and uses of assets between the business that they run and their personal lives. The reason that this concerns me is that when vendors generally book a small business loan, they generally don't go they don't close it with lots of heavyweight covenants around limitations, okay? Capital and money are fungible, and I'm a little bit concerned that the business loans might be financing aspects of folks' personal lives. And again, that's why you'll want to have your underwriting pencils sharpened a bit here. The next 4 slides that I have are about the customer experience, okay? First of all, we asked folks how long did it take institutions to respond to your credit application. And this slide, again, it covers the 5 types of lending institutions that were addressed in the survey. And when I look at this slide, it tells me a couple of things, all right? First of all, because each of the lines are so similar to one another, this data set is telling me that there is a lack of compelling competitive advantage for any of the credit provider types covered in the survey. The second thing that I'm seeing is I'm a little underwhelmed, okay? And that's kind of funny language, but let's kind of think about this here, okay? On the left-hand side of the chart, we actually see a relatively high percentage of folks. I'm sorry, on the left-hand side of the slide, we're seeing a relatively low percentage of folks telling us that the bank was able to respond to their credit application in 2 days or less. And conversely, on the right-hand end of the chart, we've got a few too many folks telling us that it's taking 6 to 10 days or more than 10 days for a lending institution to apply to their credit application. So this slide is telling me 2 things. First of all, I'm a little underwhelmed by the turnaround times, okay? It's taking too long, especially when we think about the fact that folks in the business world are reasonably demanding the kind of convenience and turnaround times that they're experiencing in their personal lives with things like Uber and Amazon.com. And again, the second thing that we're seeing here is a real lack of competitive differentiation for any of the providers. Another way to think about that is that the battle for the customer experience is yet to be won, okay? And here is the satisfaction level invoked by the slide that we just looked at, okay? 39% of folks are telling us that they're very satisfied. Again, in an Uber, Amazon world, that's not a super high level of satisfaction, okay? And again, over on the right-hand end of the chart, a few too many folks saying that they're dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. We also asked the same 2 questions. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have led into my next slide. Lenny, we have another poll question here.
It's like commercial. We'll be in suspense. And boy, I think you made a really strong statement there that the battle is yet to be won. I definitely like that characterization of this market. So here we go. We are asking you a question now that's really about sort of the productivity of your underwriters and loan officers. So we're just asking you for estimate. You probably don't actually put a clock on these folks, and you can see the percentage ranges there. But what percentage of the time do you think they're really dedicating to sort of the core tasks that it takes to connect a loan prospect to the loan in terms of fielding loans and doing these actual evaluations, structuring deals, all these other things, as opposed to all those activities that we know that we get wrapped up in our daily life, which is sort of, administration and interorganizational and asking where to find this thing and getting tech support, et cetera, et cetera. So we would love to have you characterize what your perception is of the productivity. Do you think it's as low as 0 to 20% is actually spent on real loan producing activities, servicing those people? Do you think it's all the way at the other end, way high at 81 to 100%, or would you place it somewhere in the middle? Again, please click your submit button so we actually include your result. We do want to get a statistically significant sample when we share these results with you, which we're, of course, doing in real time. So I'm going to give you just another minute. It looks like a few of you are still calling in. And, David, I'm going to do the same thing as I did last time, which is when I show the results, I'm going to ask you to comment on them spontaneously as you see them. So it's interesting. So nobody put that lowest number. I was kind of expecting not to see anybody be that unproductive. But a surprising number are really at that low end of 21 to 40%. Were you expecting to see over a quarter of our respondents make that assertion?
So that is So I am fielding the survey, just about any time that I'm in a room full of bankers. I did it at an industry event a couple of weeks ago. And one thing I'm not surprised at is that the largest share is at 41 to 60%, okay? Yep. This industry has a problem, okay? Bankers are spending too little of their time being bankers.
Yep.
But I agree with you, that 21 to 40%, that's a little bit high.
Yep.
So another way, to unpack this data is only 20% of these institutions or I should say at only 20% of these institutions are folks spending more than 81% of their time actually being bankers.
Which is where we want to get,
That's where we want to get. So there's a real problem out there. And it's another reason I kind of wish folks were seeking stellar.
Okay, well, talk to us more about it. Go ahead, because then we also want to get to Ben's prezo. Go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. I'm watching the clock and I'm setting my pace. So we also asked a couple of questions about the close, all right? And the data came out the same. Here is the data on how long it took banks to close the loan once it was approved. And again, the same findings. A lack of compelling, all the bars are the same. That tells us that all of the types of lending institutions lack compelling competitive advantage relative to one another. Too few documenting in 2 days or less, and too many documenting in 6 to 10 days or more, okay? Again, lack of compelling competitive advantage, and I'm kind of underwhelmed by the performance. This is not something happening in the high nines, as we say. Interestingly, those metrics are invoking a slightly higher level of satisfaction, but still kind of low. The highest very satisfied portion is among those closing at alternative lenders at 54%. But again, this chart is painting a picture of satisfaction that I think is rather lukewarm. Okay, and then one last fun piece of data, and this is really kind of hot off the press because the research note that I'm writing based on these findings is in draft right now. So what we did was we sliced up the market by size, okay, and we gave them labels. Micro, small companies, you can see in the bottom there, were between 250,000 and 5 million. Small were between 5 and 10 million. Mid-size were between 10 and 20 million. We put all the data through SPSS. We asked it to tell us where the statistically significant differences were, and here's what we found, okay? First of all, that there are differences among these companies, okay? At small companies, again, it's kind of that middle bracket. Again, look at that set of tranches at the bottom. More influential at small businesses are friends, colleagues, lawyers, accountants, and internet research. The takeaway from me here is that all of you folks at your lending institutions, you're going to need to field an army of BBOs that can be active in the community. They've got to be connected with the local chamber of commerce, their alumni, their friends, because it's basically friends and trusted advisors who are the most influential. Okay, micro companies, the smallest ones, are having more process difficulties with the alternative lenders than the other two types of SMBs in the study. That means that they are more ripe for retaining from switching to alternative lenders. Okay, small companies, again in the middle bracket, they are more likely to be debt averse than micro or mid-sized companies. This means that for companies in that bracket, you'll need to kind of have a talk track that talks them, I don't want to say talks them out of, okay, but you want to have an open dialogue about debt aversion, and fear of debt. And you'll want to be careful to help them come up with the right amount of debt that they can get for their company, okay, and a lending structure that will help them feel that they're not over-leveraging their companies, okay. And the last finding is that mid-sized companies are less distrustful of alternative lenders. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ben, because he's actually going to talk about some LexisNexis capabilities that actually can kind of speak to some of the issues that came up in my presentation when I used the term sharpen your underwriting pencils. So Ben?
Super, David. Thank you very much. Hey, here at LexisNexis Risk Solutions, we've really enjoyed working with David and the AT group over the years. So thank you for your insights. I'd like to talk a little bit about an information gap. So this is an information gap that lenders face when they're attempting to assess the credit risk on a small or mid-sized business. And I suspect many of you have experienced this information gap. First, I'll talk about some of the causes and then some of the perhaps startling metrics that we've seen. To begin with, small and mid-sized businesses, it is not a homogeneous group. In fact, perhaps the thing that unifies this group the most is just the fact that we call them small and mid-sized business. We're talking about different size and industries and geographies and experience and length of time of operations. Makes it a significant challenge fully understanding that business to assess the risk of that business. The second issue we deal with, small business data, frankly, it's just challenging. You know, when you think about a small business, they can be at multiple places at the same time as compared to a human. We're in one place at one time. There are multiple places at one time. There's multiple names, either legal names or DBAs or even logo level names. Challenging structures, very fluid and changing structures. The data itself is a challenge, and you have to look at the data on the person and the business. I think we just saw some metrics around how much mixing actually happens on the personal and the business level. So to truly understand the business, it's not just looking at the business, it's looking at the connected people. So some startling metrics. We have a fortunate position that we sit on a lot of data, so we get to do some interesting analyses. One thing that we've seen is that typically the time from forming a business to creating a credit profile is 5 or more years. In through-the-door populations, applying for credit, for example, we typically see that about half of small businesses have a credit history. And of those that do have a credit history, about 1 in 2 we would call a thin file, having maybe 1 or 2 trades on file. You combine that with the fact that we just mentioned that most SMBs are mixing their personal operations with their business operations. And a metric that we've identified that about 1 in 3 of SMBs or the authorized rep have a derogatory event on their file, a judgment or a tax lien or a bankruptcy or an eviction or a conviction or foreclosure. It just points to the fact that the need for information is great, but unfortunately there's this gap that many lenders are dealing with. Why does this matter? Well, particularly for the lenders themselves. As you're going about your process of customer uptake to fuel growth, you're trying to secure more customers, but if there's little traditional information on that applicant, it's difficult to not only make a justified decision, but make any decision at all. When it comes down to segmenting risk, unfortunately, if you're dealing with a credit thin file, businesses that are not homogeneous, again, start to look the same if there's limited data. And, of course, you have to identify the people with the business. Now, you know, as I've had conversations with multiple lenders, I've identified maybe 3 trends. I'll call it the brute force approach. You know, typically if you're familiar with a adoption rate or approval rate and you want to increase that, you try to go out and just find more applicants. So it's market to more to secure more. Unfortunately, as that happens, there's more negative customer experiences to all the other folks you're telling no. You can loosen the lending criteria. There's additional financial risks, obviously, with that. Not speaking out of both sides of my mouth here, but you can't just rely on the information on the person because there's so much information on the business that might be missed and be pertinent to a credit decision. So there's got to be a better way about it. The way that we've tried to address this information gap is the combination of vast data resources, big data technology to link those resources together, proprietary and unique identifiers to resolve businesses to a business entity, and then using industry expertise to consolidate all that into products that meet specific needs. So I want to focus on a couple points here. I want to start first with data. When you think about what a business does as it goes about being the business of being a business, it's leaving these footprints out in the data environment. Perhaps two of the best-known footprints are the bank credit, in other words, what's the typical credit history, and the trade credit. In other words, what credit is this business receiving from its suppliers or other businesses it's dealing with, and what's the history of repayment on those obligations? Absolutely, these data sources are absolutely critical to a credit decision when they are available. But again, as we just mentioned, on the bank credit side, only about half of businesses in the through-the-door population have that data type available. What's interesting is, and maybe it's somewhat intuitive, businesses are doing a lot of other things beyond securing credit. In fact, as they go about the business of, again, being a business, they're leaving data footprints in other areas, in public records, in other proprietary and non-proprietary information sources. So the way I think about it is this. Many times when a business comes into the existence, the first thing that it's not doing is going out and trying to secure credit. Many times the first thing it's doing is, frankly, the business owner is trying to monetize the services or products that they create. So they set up shop somewhere. It could be at their own private residence. It could be at a commercial location. They want to be contacted. So they're setting up phones or emails or URLs. At times they have to get a business license, and that could be from the state or that could be on a local level. Depending on what their business is, they're securing assets, and that could be in the person's name or in the business's name. Unfortunately, sometimes go bad. So there's bankruptcies, judgment, tax liens, that core public record data that many people are familiar with. So generally, we call these hundreds and hundreds of other data footprints alternative data. And what's exciting about this alternative data is that it has the broadest coverage across the full spectrum of small business SMBs. So in fact, the millions of thin and no-file credit are captured in this alternative data, and that's what makes it so powerful. It can be the foundation of a credit decision for these millions of thin and no files. It also enhances credit decisions on the businesses with perhaps a more established credit profile. So let's look at some metrics here. How predictive can this alternative data be? From our recent testing, we've seen that if a SMB has an active Secretary of State registration, it's half the credit risk if a business does not have that. If the SMB has had a judgment filed in the last 2 years, it's 3 times more likely to default, 4 times more likely to default if there have been multiple judgments within the past 2 years. Additionally, this alternative data on the authorized rep or on the business owner is also insightful. So on the owner side, SMB is twice as likely to default if that auth rep has no property ownership, 3 times more likely to default if the authorized rep has a felony, 4 times more likely to default if the input authorized rep or the owner has had a lien filed in the past 18 months. So data is absolutely core to understanding a small business to bridge the information gap. I want to briefly comment about our technology. We have roughly 10,000 data sources. I think the metric is 6 petabytes of data, whatever a petabyte is. The point there is whenever you have that much of anything, you have to have the right technology, the right processing power to collect, to ingest, to cleanse, and to integrate these data sources. In fact, we've developed our own internal proprietary methods, our both big data, technology processes, and our own internal linking analysis. The net result is coverage of 45 million small business entities. This includes both traditional businesses, what you think of as providing services, swiping cards, mowing lawns, fixing plumbing, developing software, but also other non-human entities, shelf corporations, shell corporations, charities, trust funds, can be various vehicles for legitimate and potentially not legitimate purposes. So this is why we're excited. We're taking these 10,000 sources that includes the alternative data, the bank credit data, the B2B trade credit, combining that through our technology, provides insights on up to 25% more businesses than other providers, particularly many of these new, these small, and these niche businesses. We're excited for the intelligence this brings through the data linking. We can see connections between both businesses and people, that's owners, executive employees, authorized representatives, tied to those businesses. And finally, the clarity that brings in making credit decisions, identifying potential fraud, researching financial crimes or anti-money laundering situations, ensuring that your supply chain is safe. And through the combination of the data and technology, we developed specific portfolios for SMB risk needs. So for credit risk, we're talking about credit scores, reports, modeling attributes, monitoring solutions, analytic services. For due diligence functions, again, supporting financial crime compliance or anti-money laundering situations, entity locators and reports, and automated identity verification watch list services. And then similar portfolios for supplier risk and even for marketing. So what does this all mean to lenders? Maybe to wrap up, let me just share a case study that we recently did with a top 5 small business lender. And their goal was to better understand what the combination of data sources would mean to approvals. So it looked in a retro test format at a portfolio of 500,000 applications. Our first study was just looking at hits on the credit data. About a 35% hit rate, and overall about 20% would have been an attractive bet with a credit-only score. In other words, getting a lot of applications coming in, but only using one type of data limited the customer uptake. There'd be many no-hits. With these many no-hits could either be risky bets or there could be lost opportunities. So then we applied this alternative data that I just described. Took the hit rate up to the 80% range, so an increase of about 45 percentage points. Then the question becomes, great, you found them, are they a good bet? And what we've seen is about 1 in 3 of these additional scoreable accounts are an attractive bet. And this is all based on the alternative data beyond what would have been available for these credit thin and no files. Now, that means the combination of the bank credit and the alternative data and our other data sources brings total attractive applications to about 30% of the population, about a 50% approval over credit data alone. In other words, not going out and marketing to more, not loosening the lending criteria, but simply being smarter, doing better segmentation with the applicants you already have. So just wrapping this up here, we talked about the challenges in small business lending and this information gap that really accentuates these challenges. At LexisNexis, our approach has been, let's bridge this information gap through combining data, technology, linking, and then industry expertise into specific solutions to meet credit risk needs, fraud needs, supplier risk, and really down the line any business need around small businesses. So really our goal has been to enable lenders to make more and better credit decisions to help further their growth. So folks, thank you for the time. I believe we now have a audience participation question and then some time left over for Q&A.
That's right, we do. And thanks so much for that overview. Very informative about your offering, especially in the context that David set for us. And this question we have right now for everybody is real simple. Would love for everybody to answer it, which is very simply, we'd like to continue this discussion with you. Would you appreciate having somebody from LexisNexis contact you to discuss this further? I think especially in light of the responses we originally saw in terms of sort of good enough versus stellar and exceptional, this might be a great place to click yes. So if you can go ahead and just opt in is basically what we're asking you to do there, and make sure you click the submit button. That would be great. I have a bunch of questions. Not much time, but let's see how many we can get to. The first one, David, is for you, and we got this question a couple of times. I think we kind of neglected to say how we defined small, medium, SMB. So just give us some idea of what the metrics were for that. What were the parameters around SMB for this survey?
Indeed, I'm glad the question was asked, and I was trying to leave as much time for Ben as possible, so I probably should have mentioned it. Here's how folks qualified for the survey. They qualified for the survey if they worked at a business that had between $250,000 in revenue and $20 million in revenue. Okay, they also had to be an actual business rather than a hobby. The way we got at that was we asked folks whether a principal at the SMB relied upon the profit from the company as a primary source of income. Okay, So those two factors, between 250K and 20 million, and had to actually be a business, not a hobby.
Great. And I think there's another question here for you. I'll let you take this one, David. So is the number of loans closed by primary institutions really driven by SMB loyalty to the bank, or could those numbers be skewed because banks simply accept more applications from their existing customer base?
I think it's driven by a couple of factors, with a bunch of loyalty mixed in. First of all, we did have the finding that SMBs generally prefer to lend to borrow where they already deposit. Okay, and I also think that and I don't have the data for this. It's kind of something that I'm inferring as a result of having been a banker and looking at the data. I think that banks are in a better position to make a good, fast call on a good credit decision because they don't need to sort of do all the things to try to make sure that this is not a fraudulent application, okay? If it's an unknown company, they need to do a bunch of things to make sure that this is not kind of a Potemkin company, something that's fraudulent. They also have a feel for whether or not that SMB is going to be, say, a strategic defaulter. Okay, so a bunch of those sort of first-line hurdles, okay, or pretests are kind of banks are already able to check those off, and they're in a better position to rapidly respond to the application of good credits.
Another question here I don't think we addressed directly, and again, David, I'll start with you. Ben, you can weigh in if you want to. So we've talked about sort of mainstream FIs and alternative lenders, and someone here is saying, my management team is petrified of the alternative lenders, especially in a market that's clearly being somewhat underserviced. I think you said, David, you were underwhelmed by the service they're getting. What's your take, David, on how much share these alternative lenders and fintechs can potentially take?
Okay, I think it's actually going to be kind of limited. Okay, I'm not going. If we were sitting one-on-one, maybe waiting for a flight at an airport, I might go out on a limb on a one-on-one basis. But obviously, this is recorded. You know what I mean? Yep. I don't want anyone saying the guy from IT Group said. Okay, I don't think it's going to get meaningfully. They're going to take a little more share. I think that they might not take lots more share, and I think this for two reasons. Okay, first of all, the data is telling me that principals at credit-seeking SMBs want to have a personal relationship with the institution where they apply for credit. And so we know that, okay? The next thing I'm about to say is something that I infer as a result of that, okay? Folks who start small businesses, they're different in cool ways than the people around them. They decided to not go into a huge institution after high school or after college like many of their friends. They stuck their neck out on the line to start a small business. They put their own capital into the business, and it's part of their identity, okay? And as a result of all those things, when they borrow money, are going to want to borrow that money from a person rather than a portal, okay? Secondly, these folks know, all right, that certain things are going to come up, like they need to accept or send a wire to a foreign company, or they might need to do a letter of credit, and they don't quite know what a letter of credit is. They know the risk of fraud is out there, and they need a trusted advisor in their life for reasons related to that and other things as well. And therefore, they are going to want to have a borrowing relationship with an actual human rather than a portal on the web. And that is where the alternative lenders are weak. I'll give you another reason, and I'll try to wrap it up really quickly because I'm staring at the clock, is we, about a year ago, had a small hiccup in the economy, okay? And when that happened, there were some hiccups at the alternative lenders. And those hiccups were interesting in two ways. First of all, they were felt right away and caused a contraction in lending at the alternative lenders. And they were also at the leading alternative lenders, not amongst the whole tranche of like followers and imitators. So when there is a hiccup in the market, okay, and in credit performance, the capital with which the alternative lenders are lending, that's going to kind of dry up fast. I'm just going to make that kind of prediction. So I think that's going to be another limitation on the amount of share that the alternative lenders take.
Great. Real quick, Ben, do you want to share at all about sort of this issue with diversity of sort of market disruptors and innovators in this space?
Yeah, let me just take the point of view of having dealt with many of these alternative lenders. I even struggle with the right term for them. Very aggressive, very data hungry, and willing to test data. In fact, some of them were really on the forefront of testing this alternative data that we've had. Also noticed that they tend to be quite analytical. And I've noticed that quite a few of these guys are pulling talent from the top banks, analytical talent from the top banks. So, definitely a force to be reckoned with, both from the aggressiveness and the talent that many of these guys have.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting here. We had some comments that came in that says, when a borrower may feel insecure, they may feel like they can go to a fintech because they don't think the traditional channels will be useful to them. We are getting to the top of the hour, though. We have lots more questions here. For those of you who submitted questions, thank you so much. We will get to them offline. They are in our queue. You'll get a personal answer. If you don't get a personal answer, reach out to me via my email or social media, and I'll make sure to chase that down for you because I appreciate so much your participation. I want to give each of our speakers maybe just a little 30 seconds if there's any final points that you want to share. David, you can go first, and then Ben.
The one takeaway I would say is they borrow early, they borrow often, but they also want a human relationship.
Great summary. Ben, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I guess my concept will go back to this information gap we discussed, and we're really moving into a new era of information on small businesses. Just the fact that so much more data is available, and now there's the data processing capabilities there to, through automated processes, link it together, build a portfolio on that business, and then provision that into scores and reports that work right into a lender's workflow.
Great. And again, if you haven't checked off on this request to opt in, please do so. I mean, I'll just encourage you with this. It's really not just, I think, the ROI in this shouldn't just be quantified with the value of the individual loans. This is really part of a branding, a relationship issue. When David talks about the relationship, it's not only do they want to get a loan from somebody with whom they already have a relationship, it's that if they get a loan from somebody and if you can qualify them, you've created a relationship that certainly leads to a lot of other stuff. And in the world of, social media, word of mouth is really, really important. So if you can successfully service some portion of this market, it might be really good, not only, again, for these individual loans, but for your brand, your market share, and your engagement with this really vibrant community. So I encourage you to do so. I thank you for your time. A lot of you have asked for the slides over and over. They are in the resource link, and you'll also get a link sent to you. Like I said, if you opt in, you will also get a link to this presentation on demand, which would be great to share with your peers in your organization, people who report to you, who you report to really bring some institutional focus to this market segment. And if you found your time today valuable, which I'm sure you have, we'd like to thank David and Ben for that. And next time you get a link from us, register for the next one of these events that we have because, again, I think we do a great job of providing you pretty efficiently some great content and the opportunity to interact with some top industry thinkers. So this is Lenny Liebman. On behalf of the whole crew here, thank you very much for your time. Have a great and profitable day.